to episode 447 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Michael O'Malley,
Andrew Swafford.
And today we're joined by special guest Zoe Nicholson. Zoe, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
In part one, we're going to be doing movies that we saw this week. In part two, we're going to continue our Don Bluth series with 1988's The Land Before Time.
Which, if you're wondering if holds up or not, totally does.
It does.
Such
and we're going to be,
movie.
and for part one, we're going to have absent Seth Troyer, but Seth Troyer is going to join us for part two to give us the dino perspective for.
It's very important.
Good representation on this podcast.
Yeah, representation.
I mean, he talked about Godzilla. He's talked about what was the YouTube series he talked. I mean, he's like,
there's like little dino YouTube.
The kid likes dinos.
Is Godzilla a dinosaur?
I would count him as a dinosaur.
We can ask.
He's like millions of years old, and he's lizard-like.
Yeah.
I don't know. That feels
He's a dinosaur plus nuclear waste.
Okay.
Well, we got a bunch of part ones, so let's jump in with a new release. Andrew, I know that you saw this at TIFF, and it was your favorite, but let's talk a little bit about how to blow up a pipeline.
Yeah, how to blow up a pipeline. As you said, my favorite movie from TIFF 2022. It is about exactly what it says it is about in the title. It is about some people blowing up a pipeline. They do it. The marketing team very much wants you to know that they do blow up the pipeline. All the posters have like the billowing smoke and the fire on it. This is a movie that I wrote extensively about. So if you want to hear more like in-depth thoughts, I guess, go to cinematary.com and look at me and Zach's TIFF coverage, of which there is lots. But essentially the plot is, it is kind of a, ensemble cast. There's no single main character, and it's all these various people from various walks of life who have decided to collectively do an act of terrorism. They know that it's going to be called an act of terrorism. They don't really care about that. They think that the havoc that the oil industry is wreaking on people and the planet is unconscionable and cannot persist. They're very jaded and cynical about the ways in which liberal attempts to combat climate change are being outpaced by, the exponential rate of the disaster, like ratcheting up. So there's like, fuck it, we're going to blow up the biggest oil refinery in Texas, which is going to send the entire industry into a free fall.
Well, just the pipeline, not the oil refinery.
Yeah, like a central pipeline that is going to like make the whole refinery non-functional, essentially. And they do it by like in like the safest way possible, I suppose. They don't spill oil or really kill anybody. I don't does somebody die? I don't remember. But anyways, so. The movie is very pro blowing up pipelines. And it also is a really tense and anxiety inducing heist thriller. I remember when I left the theater for this thing at TIFF, I was just like vibrating with adrenaline. It was still like stuck with me for days. It was such a intense movie in terms of like action thriller mechanics. It has really, really sharp really sharp sense of pacing and timing and editing. It has this flashback structure where you're kind of meeting all of the characters individually and like getting their origin story, like how they got involved in this project. And those little flashback scenes are placed at just the right moment in the story for you to be like your maximum amount of like worried for this person, like what is going to happen to them in the very next moment. Let's back up to like how they first got involved. And so it's like a really amazing exercise in sustained tension. Though I will say that seeing it a second time in a much smaller theater with a much more sparse crowd, it was much less so of that. A lot of that, I'm sure, had to do with the fact that I already knew what was going to happen. And so a lot of the suspense of the movie wasn't quite there in the same way. So I'm curious to hear from you, Michael, as somebody watching it, who just watched it for the first time. Did you have like as visceral an experience with it as I did my first time?
I thought it was a really good time, and the thriller like heist pacing and technique was really good. I will say the since you brought up the crowd, there was an amazing moment with the crowd where right at one of those, like the flashbacks typically like would happen right at a kind of climactic moment in a scene where something exciting or kind of stressful was happening. Yeah. And during one of those, like they're trying to set up a bomb and like things are like kind of going haywire. And then like right at the moment of highest tension, it like cuts to black and then we go to a flashback. And in that moment, this dude like just like cries out in the theater, "Oh, good Lord."
So it affected him that way.
Yeah. So I did not cry out, "Oh, good Lord," but I think that this was a great time. It has a very, very, very solid like heist structure, like right up to the whole like about like, you know, near the end of the movie, it looks like things are going bad, but then you get a flashback that kind of recontextualizes things and kind of like, oh, you thought you were being double crossed, but now you're being double crossed, and like that sort of thing. And like it has a lot of those kind of like genre things. Like it's very much kind of an Ocean's 11 kind of thing where like each of the characters brings a skill and they have like a single personality trait that's kind of like big and broad and entertaining, or just like kind of intense. And like I thought that was all like terrific, and it's just like a great little thriller. And I thought it was a really fun time. There's really stressful, tense moments. To be honest, like even though you said, and in retrospect it makes sense that I'm supposed to know in advance that they do blow up the pipeline, like I was not convinced that they were going to, because I thought, so in the trailer, or not the trailer, on the poster you do see smoke, but that could be from anything.
That's true.
Like, you know, so I was not sure if they would succeed or not. And it's the kind of movie that seems like politically on the ground enough to be realistic about the fact that they may not succeed. But it's a really good, it is ultimately kind of like a positive movie, which is kind of nice. So many left-wing political movies are dour and kind of unpleasant, in terms of you kind of feel like crap after the movie. And
this is like agitprop. It wants you to leave like shaking your fist in the air,
and
wanting to rally the troops, you know.
It's very much that. And I mean, if you think about the two movies, like the most high profile like indie-ish movies that are sympathetic to left-wing climate activism, which are Night Moves and then First Reformed. Both of those movies are profoundly unsettling.
They're very bleak.
Well, I was gonna ask if like the characters in Pipeline are similar to like the characters in Night Moves, which that's the one I'm most familiar with. And it's they kind of, Kelly Reichardt treats those characters in a very specific way.
I do think my thing that I will say about the movie that's maybe not quite as positive as Andrew is like, I don't think this works on the character level whatsoever. Like the characters are all cogs in the thriller mechanics. Like each one has a single character trait that you get introduced to like with their flashback or their introduction. There's like they're all meeting at this like remote location and like they all show up, and the personality that you're introduced to at the beginning of the movie is basically what you're gonna deal with throughout. And then they all have one very specific reason for wanting to blow up the pipeline, and it's usually personal. And that all works really great for in terms of just plotting and in terms of mechanics of the thriller. But it does make for a movie that's not like terribly nuanced when it comes to like character psychology and that sort of thing. And I think Night Moves is interesting because it really deals with like, it's really interested in interrogating the kind of psychology of like, what does it mean to be involved in this kind of direct action, whereas
or to be involved in like a fringe movement. You know, these are people who are kind of like existing in the margins of society.
Exactly. And we see through the flashbacks, like in theory, these characters being radicalized. Like one of the two of the characters are involved with a divest organization at their college and become frustrated with that because it's it's a lot about messaging, but not a lot of action. And they, like Andrew said, have recognized that climate change is accelerating faster than the kind of messaging that kind of liberal approach is going to take. And like, that's fine, but the way those scenes are played, it's like a foregone conclusion about where they will end up. And there's not a lot of, there's in theory angst, but because the characters are so defined along these like one political like kind of action point, it doesn't actually have much to say in terms of dialogue with like the kind of tensions that they would have. Like, they don't seem to have any personal connections with this divest organization. They are, they cut, like, one of the characters, like late in the movie, a flashback reveals that she just dropped out of college, and that's just kind of thrown in there. And like, she dropped out of college in order to do this event, this, blowing up a pipeline. And in a Kelly Reichardt movie, we would get lots of, soul searching regarding that. This movie has none. And I think that that's fine for what the movie is, but I do think that it functions more as a heist thriller / like rally, woo-woo kind of,
it's propaganda film.
Yeah, all films,
but it's like really good propaganda.
Right. And so like what this is interested in doing is making you feel like direct action against the oil industry is possible. And what a movie like First Reformed or Night Moves, especially Night Moves, is interested in is in probing like what are the like psychological ramifications of being aware of the planet's death. What are the psychological ramifications of being part of a movement in which you are like fairly isolated from like the mainstream,
and the psychological ramifications of like feeling like you can't do anything about it.
Right.
Even any sort of extreme action you could take would be a drop in the bucket compared to like the full force of the oil industry.
Right. Or even a failure or of collateral damage. Like, all of those are kind of explored in more depth. Oh, here's the train again. But all of those are explored in more depth in those other movies. And this movie like kind of gestures at that. You get like the implication that like this may all go south. There may be collateral damage, but there is none in the end. It's fairly clean, and it's very satisfying because all the pieces really slot together. And again, that's where that like heist comes together.
Right.
Is you see at the end how all of these pieces have connected together, and even the parts that seemed like they were going wrong, it was all part of the plan. And it works out really satisfyingly in that. And it's a really good time, I think, which is a movie that which is a thing I don't often say about movies that are directly about the climate crisis.
Which we should have more movies that are a good time, that are pushing people in that direction.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? As opposed to things that seem like huge chores.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This like, how seriously does this movie take itself, or is it like a Jonathan Swifty type?
It's pretty serious, but it's not. It allows itself to be like aesthetically engaging and fun, but it's not like the characters are like quipping and joking the whole time. Like the characters are meant to be fairly like serious minded, but the structure of the movie makes it not dour, even though what they're doing is very serious and they are very serious about it.
Okay.
Well, How to Blow Up a Pipeline is in theaters now, unless you're in Kansas and they're trying to boycott it because they think it'll give you the instructions on how to actually blow.
Wait, is that true?
Yeah.
Really?
The Kansas legislature is not super big on this movie.
No, but you're not doing a bit. Like, this is actually like seriously considered. Oh, okay.
They were trying to boycott the movie because they thought it would give people like the, skills to do that.
Okay, I will say, since you brought this up, there's a kind of funny scene in which these two characters meet in a bookstore, and one of the characters picks up the book How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which is the basis, the kind of base. It's the inspiration for this movie. And that book, for those who don't know, is I believe it's a Swedish philosopher. Anyway, he makes the ethical case for doing the things that they do in this movie. But
it's a nonfiction, like academic.
It is a nonfiction work. It's a manifesto, basically. I've not read it. My understanding of it. But one of the things that the characters say when this one character picks up that book, and another character comes up, he's like, "What you doing?" He's like, "I'm just doing some reading." He's like, "Is that for a class?" And the guy's like, "No." It's like, it's not actually going to tell you how to blow up a pipeline in that book, right? or he says something to that nature, and
Mhm.
I gather that's true. Like, I don't think that like How to Blow Up a Pipeline, the book, teaches you how to
No.
blow up a pipeline, and the movie barely does. Like, I don't know what they're doing. They did very complicated sciencey
I
things
don't
to
know.
make that bomb.
It's Kansas, you know.
But I'll just say it is very funny that there's a line in the movie that discusses that, like, oh, this book that the movie is based on won't actually teach you how to blow up a pipeline.
Well, again, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. It's in theaters now, and I'm sure it'll be on VOD pretty soon as well. Andrew, you saw the latest Makoto Shinkai movie, which I'm going to hope didn't say that if you can solve climate change, but you also have a girl, pick the girl.
Yeah, it's really interesting talking about this movie right after talking about How to Blow Up a Pipeline, because, yeah, as Zach is alluding to, Makoto Shinkai's last movie, Weathering with You, was like
Morally wrong.
Yeah, morally wrong, a morally bad movie about like that is proposing like climate accelerationism, essentially advocating for climate accelerationism. But Makoto
movie.
And I went to see this one despite really disliking Weathering with You. I actually have the second most popular negative review of Weathering with You on Letterboxd. It's one of
oh my god
the Letterboxd accomplishments I'm most proud of.
Next to 8.5, though, right?
Oh god,
8.5,
the
the
greatest
albatross
mark against me. Yeah, it is an albatross. But anyways, I went to see this despite disliking Weathering with You so much because Makoto Shinkai, I think, is like a genuinely terrific filmmaker, or can be a terrific filmmaker. He has made several fantastic anime films. My favorite being 5 centimeters per second. I also really like Garden of Words, and Your Name is the one that I think most people are going to know him for. He broke all records for like a Japanese film when that came out, and held on to it until the Demon Slayer movie came out a few years ago, and that made me a little sad that like his movie, which itself kind of displaced Spirited Away for that slot, then got displaced for like basically a long episode of a TV show. But he's such a talented animator. He has this really like music video inspired or like anime music video inspired editing style. He uses music very fluidly in his movies. He tells these really melancholy stories about teenagers longing for one another. And people have compared him to Hayao Miyazaki for reasons I don't fully understand. To me, his strengths as a filmmaker are so different from Miyazaki's.
He's like the John Hughes of anime, to be honest.
You could look at his plots and call him a John Hughes
He's like the John Hughes directed by Terrence Malick or something.
Yeah, so that's where I was going with it. I think aesthetically he's closer to like a Terrence Malick or a Wong Kar-wai. And Wong Kar-wai, especially because of how interested he is in like space and time and the distance that like grows between people as like various circumstances of life change. And in Weathering with You, like he always has a like some sort of thing that's keeping the lovers of his movies apart. Like he has an early movie called Voices of a Distant Star, which is like a Gundam movie basically. And it's kind of a movie about somebody's boyfriend getting shipped off to war, but it's an anime movie and he's getting shipped off to like the Gundam War, and like they eventually exist in like different parts of the space-time continuum, and they're like growing at different rates and things like that. But like there's some sort of gimmick to all of these movies that keep the lovers apart. In Weathering with You, it was like that one lover was like a supernatural being who controls the weather, and she needs to sacrifice herself to stop climate change from happening, but the like teenage boy protagonist is like, no, don't do that, stay with me, and so she does, and everybody dies. And the movie's like, isn't that sweet? But anyways, in Suzume, I'm sorry, this is a long winding road to get here. This is a movie that is just like really ridiculous. Zach, you're always asking about or like clamoring for more movies that just like don't make any sense, and maybe you would love this movie because it's really on one in that department. In this movie, the gimmick keeping the lovers apart is that one of them gets transformed into a chair.
I'm down.
It's
What-
incredible.
on. What kind of chair?
Yeah.
So it's a small wooden chair that was handcrafted and hand painted by the protagonist's mother. And is
handcrafted and hand painted before or after it was a girl?
Oh no. So protagonist is a girl. She is really into this guy who she finds out has magical powers.
Yeah.
He gets transformed into so she has this chair, right? Like she's holding on. This is such a ridiculous plot. She's holding on to this chair that was like a memento from her now deceased mother.
Yeah.
And like she and her like magical BF are off doing some, fantasy shit.
Yeah.
And like somebody takes the boyfriend's spirit and puts it in the chair.
It's like in Twin Peaks when that lady gets in the doorknob. Is it like that kind of thing?
It is like in Twin Peaks when Joan Chen gets turned into a doorknob. Yes, it is exactly that. But if then the rest of Twin Peaks was about Harry Truman carrying around this shelf from this this drawer that has this drawer pull on it. So
great.
Yeah. So that's kind of that's where you start in this movie, and it kind of gets increasingly crazy and weird from there. And there is definitely a joy to be had in just seeing this movie unfold before you, see it continue to surprise you with new ridiculous things, despite the fact that the movie dramatically is taking these things very seriously on an emotional level, right? But it is definitely a huge step down narratively, I think, from the kinds of stories that Makoto Shinkai usually tells, which I know that Michael, you're not as big of a fan of because it is a little schmaltzy. But I like the kind of broad sentimentality of Makoto Shinkai's movies. And this one is applying that broad sentimentality to some really bonkers fantasy stuff. And it does eventually become actually a revision or a second look at the thematic territory of Weathering with You. Because the fantasy stuff going on in this movie involves these doors that need to be closed. They're like doors that are portals to another dimension. And from that other dimension is coming through these spirits or spectral forces that are causing natural disasters to occur. So it is still a movie about, on the one hand, climate change, on another hand, the Fukushima disaster, which itself is kind of a symptom of climate change. Or disasters like that are going to become much more common as climate change continues to accelerate, right? So Makoto Shinkai, in his last two movies, I would say, because Your Name also involves mass death and historic tragedy, they are wrestling with the fact that we increasingly live in a world where this kind of mass destruction, the senseless chaos of the universe, just seems to be more rampant. And so in this movie, there ends up being kind of a choice at some point as to whether or not a character is going to sacrifice themselves to stop this thing from happening. But in this movie, there is a third element that is at play, and that is that there are gods in this movie. And so eventually, I mean, I don't want to spoil what happens as if this movie could be spoiled. It's so weird and specific. I think the conclusion that Shinkai comes to in this movie is humans may or may not actually be able to do anything about this. We really just need to and have hope in the gods, that the gods will save us and take care of us, protect us. And that I think is not the message that I would send in my movie about climate change. But
it's a little bit better than weather.
It's way better than like, let's just make it worse, you know? So I do want to give Makoto Shinkai props for making an entire other movie that is like essentially an apology for his previous movie. I don't know if he would frame it that way, but that was how parts of it read to me. So
sounds like a good movie to watch tomorrow, April 20th.
You could do that. You could do that. You know, Zach, I wouldn't. Yeah, it's not a bad idea. You should think about it.
All right. There you go.
The antagonist for a good chunk of the movie is a cat. The characters are chasing a cat across Japan.
I do like that.
And the cat is like getting Instagram famous because the cat is like a sentient being. And like,
that is not what I was expecting you to say about this cat.
The cat doesn't want to be like taken in or owned or like caged up by anybody. But he does like, he's like kind of, or she, I don't remember the cat's gender, is trying to coax the protagonist and her like chair BF to like follow the cat across Japan. So like the way he does that is he like goes in public places and gets strangers to take pictures of him and put them on Instagram and Twitter and stuff. Wild. It's wild.
Honestly, sign me up. It sounds like a stupid time. Suzume, now in theaters.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I got two new releases. Well, semi-new. One semi-new release, one new release. I'll start with a semi-new release, which I know, Andrew, you talked about a couple weeks ago, and that is Aftersun. This is the feature directorial debut of Charlotte Wells. It stars Paul Mescal, who people may know from Normal People, as well as Frankie Corio, who plays the daughter in this. It is really, really good. And it was one that I know Paul Mescal got nominated for an Oscar, but was kind of a little bit of an indie darling. And it's coming from the perspective of Sophie, who is the Frankie Corio character, the daughter character, and she's you kind of shift a little bit between her as kind of a preteen on holiday with her father. I think this happens 20 years prior to the current day Sophie, who also shows up in these kind of flashback moments. But for the majority of the movie, it's Sophie and her father, who's played by Paul Mescal, on holiday in Turkey, and you see it one through like mini DV footage. You see like, video cassette footage of them interacting on the holiday. And then you also just have kind of general film of like them, and taking part in this holiday. Clearly they're a little bit estranged, not totally estranged, but like Paul Mescal's character and Sophie's mother have divorced. She doesn't see her father too much. This is kind of like a holiday away where she's kind of getting time with him that she doesn't normally do. And this is one I've been wanting to see for a while. It didn't really show up in theaters around here. It didn't come on streaming or anything until more recently. But I know, Andrew, you talked about it a couple weeks ago. I really like this one. It deals with a lot of. It's a very somewhat of an opaque movie to kind of deal with. It deals. Right. You have these like mini DV footage moments where it's part of the narrative, but also kind of its own thing to a degree. Right. Where you're kind of capturing these memories, and like the mini DV footage is like the memories that are more real that you're kind of capturing in the moment, and then you have the traditionally filmed memories, kind of quotation marks, that are more imagined. And the core of the story is Sophie's kind of on this holiday with her father, and he is early 30s. Has had this kid early on, clearly is dealing with a lot of depression, and is kind of coping with the fact that, you know, he's still a younger person, but has like this massive responsibility on his shoulders to take care of his child. And so it's a lot of her kind of going about her holiday, but then these kind of unspoken moments where she's seeing her father for his vulnerabilities. And I saw a really nice review on Letterboxd talking about Paul Mescal, who I really like as an actor.
Yeah, I've been watching Normal People, which he's really good in.
He's fantastic in that. And they were talking. This Letterboxd review was talking about his back acting. So like you have you have a number of scenes where specifically you have this one scene very late in the movie where he's breaking down, like he's crying, like very aggressive, like he's like really breaking down, crying. But you don't see his face, like he's not facing the camera. He's facing a wall, and the camera is just facing his back, and he's sitting on the bed.
Mm-hmm.
And you just get this whole sequence of him just completely
he's like breaking down.
He's breaking down. He's very vulnerable, but you're not seeing like his face react to it. You're just seeing the back, and like he like acts it so physically. Like you completely feel like how he's processing this moment, but in a way that you don't have to see his face. You don't have to see like how he's reacting in that fashion. Like you just see his back, and there's just like this like complete like he's like a crumbling, like he's this really like stout, physical, like very together.
He's like doing Tai Chi or something throughout the movie.
He clearly is just somebody who's looking for some way to like center himself a little bit, and he just has this moment where he completely crumbles. And so to me, I like what I really responded to with the movie. One, Charlotte Wells shoots it in this way that to me I love. It's like it's kind of these fragmented dreams and these fragmented memories that you don't know if they're really true or not, but it's like this, it's Sophie processing how she's one seeing her father, but also trying to see her father, because she's clearly trying to see somebody who she wants to look up to. And it's not that she's not looking up to him, but he's somebody who's clearly dealing with he's processing a lot, because he's somebody who is clearly suffering from really deep, debilitating depression. And that sounds, to me, it can sound like a very depressing experience. And it's very, I wouldn't say it's necessarily super difficult to watch, but what I really responded to was that it was kind of these fragmented moments. Like it wasn't this like clean A to B to C narrative. It was just kind of this. It was like these just kind of moments in time from this week that were pieced together, that were completely biased. Like they're usually coming from Sophie's perspective, but that can also be positively biased. Like you have these really joyous moments between her and her father, but then you have these really negative moments. Like there's this quite honestly pretty harrowing, like difficult scene to watch where she signed the two of them up to do karaoke.
Oof,
and the guy calls the guy at the front's like, hey, Sophie, I forgot what the Paul Mescal character, like, it's your turn. And he just is like, I'm not going up there. And you have this really tough scene where you see Sophie go up there by herself as a child and sing karaoke by herself. And he's just kind of sitting there, just completely just clearly uncomfortable, but also just disengaged from his daughter. And so you're just kind of dealing with a lot of this, like, trying to piece together communication between the two of them. I've talked to some people who just really dislike this movie because it doesn't really have a very clear, like, 3-act narrative. But to me, I really responded to how disjointed it was, and how, you have like these flashback moments where Sophie is an adult and it's kind of this like rave type situation with these flashing lights where she is, as an adult, seeing her father like kind of just completely let loose and like dance in this moment. and I kind of connected with that because it's just kind of like her trying to connect with this person that she would have liked to be, would have liked to have a relationship with, but clearly didn't, because you don't really get a sense, but he either is not really involved with her in her life at that point, or has, possibly killed himself and is not.
I think that is what you're supposed to believe.
Yeah. And so to me, it's not really it's just this kind of melancholy movie about how it's really just difficult to like know not only who this person across from you is, but also like who your parent is, like as not just as your parent, but like as a person. And it was very effective in that way. And so if you haven't seen Aftersun, it's on video on demand services now. I would highly recommend it. I think, like I said, Paul Mescal's fantastic in it. Frankie Corio, who's the young Sophie character, is really good. But I don't know, it really moved me. I know, Andrew, you were more you weren't against it, but I feel like it didn't really move you as much.
No, I was a little lukewarm on it, but it has stuck with me, and I do think, like, as I'm hearing you describing it, I do think that it's very emotionally resonant, and I like the kind of fragmented nature of the storytelling and the like ellipses between scenes, and also like the larger ellipses between the bulk of the movie and like these small glimpses of like surreal flash forwards, and like the movie kind of inviting the audience to fill in those gaps for themselves. I think it's a really beautiful way to tell a story like this that is so wrapped up in memory, and
it's so well directed too. It's just like the way that Charlotte Wells like kind of capture, like she's really good at kind of lingering and capturing those like kind of hidden moments where you can tell how the characters are feeling without it being explicitly told to you. Like,
right,
you're capturing how you understand where his state of mind is, because you're kind of capturing these like kind of small moments on the periphery.
Yeah, it's a lot of nonverbal acting.
Yeah,
and which must have required a lot of really great coaching on the part of the director, right?
Sure. Yeah, the other one I want to talk about really quickly is Rye Lane. It just came out on Hulu. I think it premiered at Sundance. It's directed by Rain Allen Miller, who I believe this is her first feature film. It's very, I think it's easy to describe it as kind of like Before Sunrise meets Wes Anderson to a degree. That's not totally giving it a lot of credit. But it does wear those influences on its sleeve pretty well. The skinny of it is that you have these two 20-somethings. They meet. They're in, let's see what it says, South London, and it's pretty much them kind of walking and interacting with each other throughout a day. They're helping each other through these two breakups to a degree. And I'm not super familiar with either the actors, David Johnson and Vivian Opara, but they're both incredibly charming. I was really charmed by this movie. You can see the Wes Anderson influences to it, but I also feel like it's all, South London in itself is a very like vibrant, colorful district, and Rain Allen Miller really captures that to a degree. It's a very
nice as a character.
Yeah, you feel the way she captures the community, not just like the two characters, but like it feels very ingrained in this area of London as well. And she captures that in a way that I feel like was pretty sophisticated. Like she really has this understanding of who the people are that they're engaging with on the periphery. But also, I think the one influence it's missing is Steven Soderbergh. It utilizes a lot of like late period Soderbergh, specifically like Unsane and Kimmy and High Flying Bird, like that fisheye lens, like kind of.
Was it shot on an iPhone?
It had to have been, because it really it utilizes that kind of fisheye lens cinematography as well. And the way that that like the movement and like some of the scenes that they utilize is just like, it reminds me a lot of how Soderbergh kind of moves between spaces and like creates this almost like surreal effect, which I really appreciated because it did like it's kind of creating this surreal effect without having to lean on special effects or something like that. It's completely done through the camera. And yeah, I mean, there's not much else to really say about it. I think it's very charming. It's very funny. It's very affecting. And it kind of just shows this playfulness and this vibrance that you don't necessarily, it's not to sit there and like shit on Netflix rom-coms, but like,
it's okay if you do. I don't think
yeah, like we had
no affinities with them.
We had the episode on like All the Boys I've Loved Before, and then like there's like something like Kissing Booth, which are very by the numbers, like teen bopper, like just trying to get like just to elicit a reaction from a specific audience. And this one feels like it's not necessarily trying to elicit a response from a specific audience, but like it's trying to like make a fucking movie. And I really appreciated that because I think the romantic comedy genre can like elicit that when you try. It was also a movie that reminded me, it kind of made me want to go back and rewatch the Small Axe series that Steve McQueen did because it reminded me a lot of Lovers Rock.
Such a good movie.
Yeah, which is such a vibrant, like wonderful, like very, very like just kind of a very charming, like positive movie that came out on Amazon a couple of years ago. But it's very much in the same way. This is also kind of like ingrained in that South London Nigerian community, like Lovers Rock is. Like Nigerian Caribbean kind of community that is around there. And so yeah, Rye Lane, it's on Hulu right now. I don't, it's like an hour and 20 minutes. I don't know. I highly recommend it if you're just kind of looking for a good time that like is not requiring a lot of effort, but also is giving you something that's very like, it's a good movie while also not requiring a lot of like effort on your end.
Sweet. I want to watch it.
Cool. We got a few more minutes. I'm going to toss it over to Zoe though, because.
Okay, I'll be quick too.
Yeah.
Because there's not much to say. Okay, a little background on me is I don't usually watch a lot of movies. I'm a big TV girl. Like I grew up, Entertainment Weekly was my favorite thing to look forward to. But recently I've been trying to watch more movies and going back and like a lot of movies that I've missed and haven't seen. But this weekend I watched two movies. One of the worst movies I've ever seen. One probably a movie that I'll add back into my like a good comfort watch movie. So the first one is Conan the Destroyer, which is like, I don't know, sometime back in the 80s, Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's the sequel to Conan the Barbarian, which, full disclosure, I have not seen Conan the Barbarian, but I don't think that really mattered. But basically, Conan's already kind of a legend. He gets hired, him and his ragtag group get hired to escort this virgin princess to find a horn, and then that will bring their god back. I don't know.
Sounds like a show guy, honestly.
Wilt Chamberlain is her bodyguard, who
What?
in the beginning is planning to kill Conan. And so, like, the viewer, every single thing that's going to happen. Like, all the nefarious plans, which I don't really like, but whatever. And then Grace Jones comes along and is indebted to Conan because he saves her life. And she's kind of a Amazonian type. Her ass is hanging out. She's wearing a tail, and her weapon is but she's fierce.
You're not doing a good job of selling this movie as bad.
That sounds great.
Wilt Chamberlain, Grace.
It has all of these pieces, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. But I don't know. I guess it's the directing, because the pacing of it was absolutely terrible. Like the one scene where they're going and the princess is captured by this wizard into a crystal palace while they're sleeping at night, and the whole, like, while they're sneaking in, it's like a 10-minute sequence, and they show every single thing that's happening, and like the tension does not ramp up at any point.
Man.
And there's also really bad editing cuts. Like, you can tell, like, I think that he's like in this circular room where there's coverings over all these mirrors. So it shows you one half of the circle and then switches to show you the other half of the circle. But because it's identical, it just looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger pops up in the middle of the frame like that. I would also say the character of Conan is wholly uninteresting. I know he like is not supposed to speak a lot, but you know, maybe some words would be nice. Very homoerotic. I mean,
oh, I bet
Conan is just in a tuxedo the whole time, and him and Wilt Chamberlain have a pretty intense fight sequence, and then the ending sequence, the god comes back, but it's like a sworded version of the god, and they have to rip the horn out because that's where his power comes from. Like, that's a very gross, real effects. But anyways, there was just like a lot of empty, dead space, like in those really bad like 80s movies. I don't know how else to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
There was no tension. There was no pacing. The writing was terrible.
When you were talking about the pacing, I looked up who edited the movie, and this editor edited some really good movies. They made Die Hard, RoboCop, Total Recall, and Basic Instinct, and more. I could continue.
You can't win them all.
You can't win them all.
Listen, sometimes you got to pay the bills.
That's what I think happened.
Yeah.
And it ends on the shot, so like his whole ragtag group gets a space with the princess becomes the queen because the queen is her like evil aunt, you know, obviously. And so she takes over and she offers the ragtag group a place, and she's like, well, Conan, like, you didn't get your dead girlfriend back, like promised, but wow, you could have my kingdom and we could rule together. And he's like, no, I want my own kingdom. And so he walks away. And then the last scene is just him. It's like completely black. And there's a singular light source from above on Arnold Schwarzenegger, like on a throne, like very like Thanos at the end of that Avengers movie. And it teases the next movie, but that next movie, I guess, never happened.
Wait, didn't they reboot it though?
I looked it up. It was canceled. But yeah, so I think that's, if you want to watch like it's supposed to be camp, but it doesn't really see itself as that. I think it sees itself as like a really good action movie that's not. But I still think it's visually entertaining enough, and Grace Jones is keeps things interesting. But yeah.
I'm curious about Wilt Chamberlain because I'm looking, and this is the only acting role that he has. Everything else is like documentaries that he's in. This is like a heck of a, like, I'm just going to act in one movie kind of
I have no clue, but I love seeing him next to Arnold because he towers over him.
Oh, I can imagine.
Great basketball player.
Yeah. And like his horse that he rides on is way bigger than everyone else's horse. But he's not giving what, you know, he's not doing a bad job comparatively to the rest of the cast, but, you know, he didn't have much to go with.
Not a slam dunk performance, you wouldn't say?
But
Foul ball. No, that's baseball. Anyways.
We're mixing up our metaphors.
Next movie. So the next movie I watched, and I really liked this, was Galaxy Quest. I think it could have been a little bit better, but do I have to explain this movie? Okay.
If you don't want to, you don't have to.
Apparently, I watched it with my friend. He was like, it's Three Amigos, but in space. So it's, you know, a Star Trek movie, but real aliens have found it, and they capture them, and they're like, we're about to be defeated, and we need you to save our civilization. I really liked it. I think they really underutilized everyone except Tim Allen. I feel like Alan Rickman could have done more. Tony Shalhoub could have done more. Tony Shalhoub in another racially questionable casting. He's playing an Asian.
What?
Yes, his character's last name is Kwan. And he's playing like Tech Sergeant Chen, like the Zulu character. So Barney Weaver looks really great in that blonde wig, I'll have to say. But my favorite part of the movie was the aliens. The guy who plays like the head alien. A really really fucking commit, and he's just so endearing. And then by the end, where Tim Allen's like, "No, you're the commander," I was fully on board. And Justin Long was in it, and I think he was like 19. But yeah, there's
Isn't he like the red? Isn't Justin Long the red shirt guy?
no, that's Sam Rockwell.
Oh, that's Sam Rockwell. Okay.
Justin Long is like the nerd who they reach back to him back on Earth, and he like, because he's such a nerd and knows like the bowels of the ship, he's able to help them sneak around and stuff.
Right.
So it was a good movie, you know. Was it great?
Tony Shalhoub was raised in a Lebanese Maronite household, but he was born in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Yeah, so he's not
Asian.
Interesting.
Not that old of a movie either. It came out in 1999. But yeah, I thought it was good. I thought Tim Allen was well cast because he was playing, you know, a self-possessed asshole who was kind of hanging on to his one famous role. But yeah, I really loved the aliens. I thought they were great. Missy Pyle was one of the aliens. Pretty sure Dwight was one of like not a speaking role extra. Dwight Schrute, what's his name? Rainn Wilson. But yeah, I'll definitely be rewatching that when I just need a good comfort movie.
Nice. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be back with Seth Troyer and some dinosaurs in The Land Before Time, Part 2, after this. And we're back with part 2 of episode 447 of Cinematary. In this part, we're going to be continuing our Don Bluth series from 1988's The Land Before Time, directed by Don Bluth from a script by Stu Krieger. Film stars Gabriel Dane, Candace Hudson, Judith Barcy, and Will Ryan. Littlefoot, a young
Will Ryan
is orphaned after his mother perishes while protecting him from a vicious carnivore. With her last breath, she tells him how to get to the legendary Great Valley, where he will be reunited with others of his kind. His friend Sarah, Littlefoot sets out for the fabled land, meeting a variety of new friends along the way, while also being tracked by the killer dinosaur that mortally wounded his mother. He killed his mom. According to studio production notes, director-producer Don Bluth and producers John Pomeroy and Gary Goldman started work on the film in 1985. Quote, even before their state-of-the-art headquarters, Sullivan Bluth Studios moved to Ireland in November 1986. The Hollywood Reporter stated that the picture's budget would be larger than the $9.5 million spent on An American Tail. During production of An American Tail, talk began of the next feature with Bluth and executive producer Steven Spielberg. Bluth and Spielberg wanted to do a film similar to Bambi, but with dinosaurs. Spielberg's longtime friend George Lucas was also brought in on the project after being interested with it. The three pursued An American Tail writers Judy Fruitman and Tony Geiss, both of whom were also prominent writers for Sesame Street, to write the screenplay for the film. Their initial draft was based on their early ideas, but when it was felt the story was too juvenile, Stu Krieger was brought on to revise their draft. Early into story development, the film was about a group of young dinosaurs looking for a wise older dinosaur. Later on, Bluth explained, quote, we came up with another idea that none of these dinosaurs get along with each other. They all hate each other. They're taught from the time they were born to not associate with one another. That's racism.
Nice.
All right.
I'm glad he said that.
Yeah.
Bluth, Spielberg, and Lucas originally wanted the film to have no dialogue, like the Rite of Spring sequence. But the idea was abandoned in favor of using voice actors in order to make it appealing to children.
I want to know who abandoned that idea, because Spielberg and Lucas could have forced that through with their industry clout.
Well, it was
Who chickened out? Who
Probably
chickened out?
George Lucas. He's
It
always
was
chicken out
Spielberg.
left
No,
and right.
honestly, no, it was Spielberg. We'll get to that in a second.
Steven.
Also a chicken.
Production notes mentioned that Bluth storyboard artist Dan Krunster and Larry Lecker and researchers worked together to develop the film's prehistoric characters, how the prehistoric characters would look and move. The research involved observing the movements of modern creatures like giraffes and elephants and studying models and fossils at museums such as the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., Museum of Natural History in Los Angeles, the Field Museum in Chicago, and the Museum of Natural History in New York. Production notes noted that approximately 1 million drawings were generated from the film's concept phase to completion, included were 100,000 hand-painted cells, 600 painted backgrounds. Late into production, The Land Before Time underwent a severe cutting and editing of footage. Spielberg and Lucas thought that some scenes in the movie would appear too dark and intense for young children.
Chickens.
I can't believe it. I can't.
At a screening in
Spielberg's
Soho
always
Square.
turning guns into walkie-talkies and ET.
No. I guess
You know?
I can believe it, but I'm incensed.
That's why it's only an hour long.
That's
It's very short.
At a-
Cut out all the sex.
At a screening in Soho Square, London, late April. So Spielberg told Bluth while looking at the scenes from the film, quote, "It's too scary. We'll have kids crying in the lobby and a lot of angry parents. You don't want that."
This is the dude that made E.T. Like that movie has people crying for decades.
A
What is
total
his
of
problem?
19 fully animated shots from the shark tooth attack were cut from the final film to attain a G rating instead of a PG rating.
Release the
can be
Bluth cut.
Yeah.
Examples can be seen in the storyboards of the chase sequence of the Briar Patch. POV shots of Sharptooth's snappy jaws were deleted, and shots were rearranged to shorten the sequence. The results end in continuity errors depicting the Tyrannosaurus with his right eye still open after it had been blinded. In 1988, the New York Times said The Land Before Time is the work of Don Bluth, whose style of animation harks back to the best of Disney. Mr. Bluth has come to look like a true purist in the world of modern animation. This time he sounds a much less sacrosanct and more traditional note that he did with the earlier An American Tale. Even better, most of The Land Before Time is so authentically geared to the thinking of children that it should charm adults as well. The Washington Post 1988 said there is nothing about either the story or its execution to place The Land Before Time alongside the classics. But then again, the age of animated masterpieces may be forever past. Still, though, it's not a great film. It is an entertaining and at times emotionally rich one. In 1988, Roger Ebert said, "I guess I sort of liked the film, although I wonder why it couldn't have spent more time on natural history and the sense of discovery and less time on tragedy. And perhaps the kids in the audience won't find it strange to learn that dinosaurs lived for many generations in the Green Valley, even though Littlefoot is earlier described as the last of his species."
Wait, Don Bluth said that last line?
No,
Roger
Ebert was
Oh, Ebert.
So I do have questions about him being the last of his species, because at the beginning of the movie, they say like only his grandparents and parents are alive, and he is the only hope for the continuing of their line. Which does that mean like it's just gonna be like an ancestral line of dinosaurs? Like,
yes.
I had like
I
big
thought that just
questions.
been like their little herd. She just had one egg. Like
Yeah, so I ended
that
up thinking
line.
that by the end of the movie, but like at the beginning of the movie, I was like, whoa, I forgot about that.
All right.
Also,
Okay.
once they all die at the end, there's like 12 other movies that are all like
Yeah.
part of the DMT trip, where there's a bunch
Dude,
of long
last-
it's
necks.
a TV show, I think.
Yeah, the last like Land Before Time movie was like 3 years ago.
Oh my
Oh
god.
Oh my gosh.
It was very
Wow.
recent. I was like
Did,
looking at
Did y'all watch any of those sequels? I remember watching
I did.
them.
Yeah.
I did. They go a few of them go harder into the dinosaur racism stuff, if I
Mhm.
remember right.
Well,
There's one with a comet too.
let's dig into the Land Before Time. I'm gonna start.
No.
I'm gonna start Zoe with a special guest.
Yeah.
What is your history with Land Before Time?
I definitely remember watching it and liking it. The fact that you said Bambi with dinosaurs, like that's literally what it is. I don't think it's much deeper than that. Honestly, I have some issues with it after rewatching it as an adult. And one of those is the character of Sarah.
She kind of sucks.
She's a bitch, and
And it's
you know,
unfair. Yeah.
well, I just know she's kind of one dimensional. I would have liked a little bit more. Or I think her prideful downfall should have come earlier in the movie, because by the time it happens, there's like what 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
So
I blame Steven Spielberg. He probably cut out all the good stuff with Sarah.
Yeah, they
and like who like Spike, we get no backstory on like Spike or that old spiky tailed dinosaur that gives Littlefoot some wisdom right after his mom dies.
Yeah, that guy shows up to give Littlefoot a pep talk and is like, "All right, see ya, kid. Enjoy
just
being an
talking about
infant
adult."
in the apocalypse."
So
yeah, he was like Columbo in the Great Muppet
yeah,
Caper.
I didn't. The other thing I had an issue with was like I understand what they were trying to do, and I know that this was in the 80s, but like, you know, like they're trying to show that when Littlefoot is on the right way to the Great Valley, he becomes like a light orange color, awash in like the sun. But it didn't like really change. It didn't seem consistent, and I don't know. It was just like bad, and it took me out of the movie. And I didn't like the lighting choices, except for the sun, the sky. I liked the skies, but that was pretty much it.
Did you watch it on Netflix?
Yeah.
It was the Netflix, like the cut that they had on Netflix, like had strong, like it felt like a VHS cut. I don't know. Did anybody else watch it on Netflix?
I watched it
did.
on Amazon, and I got a similar sense from it that it wasn't the best transfer.
It needs
Yeah, retransfer.
Yeah, because it
I
was like
think
their colors were. It was more than just a shadow, or like them being in the sunlight.
Yeah.
This is like an ongoing issue with like restoration of animated things. This is like an inside baseball kind of thing, but like as Disney has like, for instance, like done the Ultra HD like 4K releases of their films, like people have talked about that the coloring is different in them.
Yeah.
And it has to do with like how they transfer the original cells to like the digital format. And I don't know like exactly what's gone on with Don Bluth stuff, but it all feels like it's in need of a restoration, and maybe that would fix some of the color issues. I don't know.
Like I was like watching through it, and I was like, this could really use like some sort of 4K restoration. Like I think it would benefit it a lot. But anyway, Seth, we have Seth Troyer added to the conversation. Seth, what is your relationship with The Land Before Time?
I loved it, of course. I was a big dinosaur kid ever since I was little.
Oh, we know.
And I was like, famously could just bang out a bunch of names of dinosaurs just on sight.
What was your favorite dinosaur?
Oh, I really like Ceratosaurus, and Baryonyx is up there. Solid, you know.
What do you think about the Deinonychus?
I love the name. That's about it with that guy. But I don't know. Yeah, I always remember it being sort of like a one that I never really loved this first one. I watched a bunch of the other ones because I loved just like, hey, I'm having a good time in the valley. But like this one was so like such a bummer. Like anytime I would put it on like a Sunday afternoon and just be like, oh my God. And it was like the colors, especially, like on a VHS, which I was watching it as a kid, like it is a dark movie. Like most of the movie is brown and orange. For a kid's movie. I remember like just like being like, oh, like, well, like maybe we'll put in one of the other ones that is like bright and happy and shiny and stuff. Although this did have the best sharp tooth action, which was really what I was looking for. Big highlight. And recently I rewatched it post like just like two winters ago. I rewatched it for the first time, like basically as an adult. And it was just on in the background during Christmas time, like when I had just moved back from Columbus after like breaking up with my partner and like leaving my job and like just living with my friend at the moment, just like not feeling good, not having a good time. And this was on in the background. And I just remember like barely even paying attention to it, but being affected by it and like touching my face and suddenly like there's tears in my on my fingers. Just like,
How did those get there?
how did that, this the valley. They made it to the valley. Maybe one day I'll make it to the valley. I think I'm pretty close to the valley at this point.
Is the valley inner peace or is it anti-racism?
It's inner peace as far as I'm concerned in my life, but I also hope it's anti-racism because that would be great as well. But I
Also,
don't
like
really think
collective
any of those-
resource sharing as well.
Yeah, it's like a utopia.
Yeah.
Well, this is dystopia, which is cool. It is like The Road with dinosaurs.
If they actually get to where
It is,
they're going.
Wait, I have a
Holy
question
cow.
about the shark tooth. I thought the shark tooth that killed the mom is dead, and then they just kept seeing other shark tooths, but they all thought they were the same.
I think he just kept on waking up.
No, that's what it was. I was talking about in the notes. Like it was the same shark tooth, but the animation, because of Steven Spielberg, was disrupted, and so
Steven.
Okay.
there's a continuity here.
We can't let him have his eyes closed.
Yeah. Andrew, what about you?
I like this movie a lot. Similar to Seth, I watched it as a kid, and I watched the sequels more than I watched this one because they are just so much more digestible as children's entertainment. Like they're just kind of like kids' TV sitcoms with dinosaurs. But this one is like art. Like it's trying to do something. It's trying to make a statement. It's trying to like give you an experience. It wants to affect you emotionally, right? And going back and rewatching it as an adult, like it hits so much harder than it did then. Like I just don't remember engaging with it quite in this way, because I guess like a lot of that, like there is emotionally heavy stuff in the movie that like any kid can recognize, and maybe more so if that kid has dealt with grief already. But like so much of the movie about like their sort of collective struggle across this like increasingly apocalyptic wasteland felt relatable and sad, and in some ways inspiring. But I also one thing that stuck out to me this time is just like how good the animation is.
Yeah.
Like it has this really like tactile sense to it. Like when you see the first leaf star like falling from the sky, and it has like a little pool of water in the middle of it that reflects Littlefoot's face, like I feel, and it's like translucent too, like light shining through it.
You just want to lick the screen.
Yeah, like I feel like I know what that feels like. I feel like I know what it sounds like as it's swaying through the air, and not just because of like the Foley work in the movie, right? It's just like the way that it is drawn and colored says so much about the way that the world kind of feels. And like I have all these sense memories of this movie, like Littlefoot like snuggling into this little indentation on his mom's back at the beginning of the movie is just like there's something like weirdly like just like sensory about it. I don't know. Like I really admire like Don Bluth's commitment to like making this thing look like a painting for a lot of it.
Yeah, I mean, like we talked a little bit in the first episode of the series about Secret of Nim, and I feel like that probably is more him trying stuff a little bit more than American Tail.
Yeah.
Like while watching, especially the first 20 minutes or so of this movie, I feel like this is the one where he's really flexing the animation muscle.
Yeah. I really like the way the characters were animated too. I think I like the characters in the movie generally. Like they're all very like well defined and unique. They have great little fun personalities that I can understand why they wanted to make like sequel movies, because like you want to just hang out with that gang again. But like the way they're animated too, like demonstrates things about their personality. Like the way that Petrie moves, like has such like reflects so much his like nervous, anxious, like panicky
I loved Petrie.
personality.
Favorite.
And I also like how they talk. They all talk differently. They all have like different speech patterns. Like Ducky's like yep, and like Petrie always referring to himself in the third person and things like
Bro,
that.
I hate
Yeah,
that shit.
yeah.
I hate that shit, to be honest.
Really?
No, I do love it. It almost like there is like a cultural difference in the species.
I loved it. I wish Petrie didn't look. Petrie reminded me a little bit too much of Hades in the Hercules animated movie. You know,
Oh,
Hades
really?
To his sidekicks.
Oh, the sidekicks. Yeah, I could see that, like the little green
He's
sidekick.
kind of like
for sure.
Bartok in Anastasia too, like that.
Mhm.
It's just
There's
a
only,
sharp.
like, Don Bluth.
Yeah, I'm excited to revisit that one for the next episode. But Michael, I wanted to hear from you about this movie too, specifically as it relates to other kids movies, because it is dealing with this, like the center of the movie, I guess, at least in the first half of it, is this children's lit trope of like a kid losing their parents, and then like having to sort of stake out a life for themselves. And it's very similar to some movies that I know your son has watched on loop, like Bambi and Charlotte's Web, right? Like,
Yeah.
how does this movie compare to those for you?
I remember, so my memories of this movie growing up, it was kind of like an American Tale where I didn't watch this movie that much, but I definitely watched it enough that I had memories of it. And I remember preferring American Tale to this, but rewatching it, I like this a lot better than American Tale. And I think the reason is like how much it is in conversation with that, like specifically Bambi, which is a movie that like I've been lukewarm on most of my life, but because I had to rewatch it so many times with my son over the past few years, I kind of turned around on this movie, on Bambi. And one of the things that about Bambi that's so unique among like children's movies, or really animated movies at all, is like just the amount of space that the movie gives to those scenes where you're just watching characters in motion for a long time without anything really happening, and
just sitting in the feeling, really.
Right, you're like sitting in the feeling, and like the really famous, scene where Bambi's mother gets shot. Like everyone remembers that Bambi's mother gets shot, but one of the things that's really striking about that scene is there's the gunshot, and there's like 2 lines of dialogue in the scene after that. But the scene is really long after that. Like it is like perfect silence, like snow falling, and like Bambi's dad talks to him like a couple words, and that's it. And like the rest is you watching these really subtle character animations showing their emotions. And I think the beginning of this movie has that going for it as well. Like the beginning of this movie, there's like some voiceover, and there's a few lines of dialogue to establish that the dinosaurs are racist. But after that, like a lot of it is simply like watching the animated craft of these characters walking around in this environment, and like having like the sharp tooth sequence at the beginning where the mother gets killed, like, and stuff like that is very, very visceral in the sense of it's like foregrounding action rather than dialogue to explain things as happening. And that is extremely rare, I feel like, in kids movies. Like Charlotte's Web is a very talky kids movie, but like Bambi 100% like is like that. And this whole time, like as we've been doing this Don Bluth series, Zach has been talking about how Don Bluth wanted to evoke old Disney movies, and a lot of the reviewers do that too. And I kind of a lot of times feel out of sync with that, because Don Bluth movies don't look at all like old Disney movies to me, because the old Disney movies he aspires to have this like regality to them that like Don Bluth movies never have. But like this movie in particular, like that sort of patience with like you're going to be entertained by watching characters just move. Like you're going to be entertained by the animation and the way that we're like sculpting like the shapes is I really liked that. And I think that when the movie commits to that and is patient with it, it's really something, which is why I'm so furious that we don't get the like silence, Rite of Spring cut, because I truly, reflecting on why did I think that this movie was worse than An American Tale growing up, and as a kid, like when I was like 5 or 6 or whatever, and like from the earliest memories of this film, I have hated the dialogue and characters, and I think that they're irritating. I don't like I don't like Yep Yep Yep. I don't like.
Oh, wow.
I don't know. I don't like that. Like, and another thing that bothered me as a kid, and like still kind of irritates me as an adult, is like how there's like basically like baby names for all the stuff. Like, there's an earthquake at one point, and they called it an earth shake.
Yeah.
I
And I'm
love
like,
that.
I was like, why
I
did they
like
call
this
it?
too. Yeah.
Why do they call it that? Like,
That's world building. It's like it.
how do
They
like
don't
okay?
speak English, really.
They don't.
It's
They don't
like,
speak They do speak English in the sense of like non-proper nouns get transferred into English. You know, like I get like sharp tooth. They're not going to call it like Tyrannosaurus or Allosaurus or whatever.
Yeah, they don't know. They don't know the Latin term.
Yeah, and
Maybe the way I
as-
have to put that.
as a kid, I always wanted them to use the like scientific dinosaur names, and that bothered me less as an adult. But like the things that did bother me were things in which there were real like just mundane words that they just made baby words. Like I don't know. Like the thing that stuck out to me is there's nothing about dinosaurs that makes earthquake and earthshake like that change need to happen. And I don't know. It just there's
I
things
love
about this
Michael, I
movie-
think you're dying alone on this hill. man. Yeah.
I'm fine with
loved
that.
it.
There's things about this movie that feel so infantilizing to me that drive me crazy because other parts of this movie are so serious.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's just a complete mishmash of like highs and lows in this movie for
Well,
me. And
Yeah, like there's an implied primitivism by these terms that they are just because they're
Hmm.
from so long ago. They're just a bunch of
yeah, I don't know. Like
dumb, like
and
primitive
the sun
beings.
is like this mythic guide that they follow. Like I like that because I think you're right. So that
I mean, you guys are probably right, but like, and maybe I'm just like I don't know, maybe I just want the gritty realism or whatever. But like, when these characters shut the hell up, like this movie is so striking. But every time these
I
characters
agree.
open their mouth, it becomes a different movie, and I don't like the other movies.
I think I disagree. I think that like it matters that these characters are kids, like they're little kids, and they speak kind of silly. Silly.
I think it makes the bleakness of the world even bleaker and like more
I agree.
stark. It
Yeah.
also keeps it from being incredibly depressing because there is that lightness and that like Ducky is like very comedic. So I think they got pulled. They were trying to do two things, and then they got caught kind of somewhere in the middle in some places.
My rebuttal to this, and then I'll have died on this hill, and we'll let it lie. Is that Bambi does a very similar thing in the sense of these are very like for the first half of the movie at least, like complete innocence, like this like doe-eyed, like literally doe-eyed
They're Pokemon.
characters, you know.
Thumper is a
and-
very similar character to the characters that we
Right.
see.
However, the difference is that in Bambi they don't invent terminology and they don't make them speak in baby voices. Like the Bambi is able through the animation and through the voice acting to communicate that innocence and naivety without resorting to like kind of irritating dialogue ticks.
No,
And-
so I will take issue with this as well and say that like they do not all speak in baby voices. Ducky speaks in a baby voice because she's the youngest. Spike doesn't speak at all because he's like literally.
I
a
love Spike.
newborn.
Spike's the best animated too.
And then like Littlefoot and Sarah speak the most adult because they are like we're supposed
Yeah,
to be
they're like
preteens or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
yeah.
And they
So-
used one. I feel like they used one scream for Sarah.
Yeah.
Like
yeah, I can
every
see that.
scream she had was the exact same.
Yeah.
Well, I will defer to the majority. So I have spoken my piece.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I think it's important.
Michael
Because
just
we
wanted
I mean-
more. He just wanted more adult dinosaurs, which actually was something that was brought up in the making of the movie. So
I mean, that would have been nice. I
I'm
mean,
Team Don Bluth.
I can concede though that like this, like a lot of Don Bluth stuff just does seem to take cheap shots in certain places, as far as like I don't know, trying to get you all watery eyed, like
Mhm.
maybe before it's really even earned sometimes. But yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know.
you don't really
and the
know
way
that much about
the
the
characters are
relationship
just
before
so
they lose
over the
them on.
top, like anime looking, like borderline, like maybe a little too silly in some cases. The character designs.
I thought there was like a lot of moments that had no emotional payoff, like when Petrie or just kind of happens. Like, I don't know. I just thought big emotional moments weren't that emotional, and it was also just kind of brushed off that they decided to commit murder. I mean, it was vengeance for their parents, but they went out of their way to kill the small tooth.
I mean, murder.
Well, he kept
Although-
coming back, right? He was like he was a continual danger in the movie, right? I support the murder.
Yeah,
I
I
did
think
too,
they
but I'm
definitely
like-
murder him.
It just seemed like
Pro-murder podcast.
they like saw him far off. He
Pro
wasn't
murder, anti baby
aware of
voices.
them when they decided that.
Yeah.
I think if a group of children is being pursued by a person who wishes to eat them, those children can kill that person. That is ethically okay
Especially
in my
in a-
book.
Post-apocalyptic scenario.
Yeah.
I do agree though, like in that another thing with this movie is that makes the beginning really good is there's incredibly strong emotional setup, which is that Littlefoot is functionally orphaned and then has to find the Great Valley, and that is a really strong emotional connection. And as these new characters get introduced, it's kind of haphazard the emotional through line we're supposed to have with these characters. Like I think they all have their thing, but the best dramatized 100% is Littlefoot, and I think that that's a consistently moving element of the movie, and then the other characters is kind of hit and miss.
Well, it's kind of like Wizard of Oz, right? Littlefoot is our Dorothy character, and he gets these little compatriots along the way who are like fun and interesting and diverting. But that's not really the emotion. Like none of them really hold the emotional center of the movie.
I agree, but like with Petrie specifically, I think there's maybe like one or two lines of dialogue about him not being able to fly before he actually learns to fly. It feels. I was struck watching this when he's like, "Oh, I can fly, and I'm so happy I can fly." I kind of was like, I didn't realize that was a big thing for you.
Yeah.
That's like his whole thing. I feel like there's tons of scenes where they
I
talk
didn't
about
realize he
Petrie
learned. I was
flying.
like, that was him learning to fly. I think.
Yeah.
Like, it seemed like he was cheating, but
Well, and I feel like, the whole point of, the emotional crux is like Littlefoot, having his parent die and having to get to the Great Valley. Like that just goes back to, really, you could have distilled this movie down to a silent movie. Like it could have been The Rite of Spring from
Mhm.
Could have been, man.
because
I know.
because
At
honestly,
least with subtitles.
the first 20 minutes of that movie is so affecting without barely any dialogue. Like it really could have just been like, I don't know, like a lot of, even when people talk about it today, like they talk about that movie and it's like, oh, it's so sad because Littlefoot's mother dies, and you have like that whole sequence. I'm like, yeah, but none of that has to do with the dialogue. Like you could have made a practically silent movie in a four-lane before, and it would have been as affecting as it is for you today.
It's the color, like that's the first scene that's like just completely like gray. And also like the moment that he's realizing his mother is dying, it's one unbroken shot that's like a very slow zoom out.
Yeah.
Oh, to reveal. Yeah, it is
Yeah.
so
was
it's
hard to
intense.
Yeah.
Twisted.
I want to
I
say,
do-
since you brought up the colors again, Andrew, like
Mhm.
I think the one thing I've noticed rewatching these Don Bluth movies as an adult, and this was something I wouldn't have paid attention to as a kid, but like I think consistently my favorite like visual element of all these Don Bluth movies are the backgrounds, which are like
Oh,
they're
yeah.
beautiful.
incredible in this movie. Like and they look so just like painterly and like scary and apocalyptic, and
really
I
do.
love those. I love them.
I love the paint. Like towards the end, there's like that orange. They were getting close to the Great Valley, which I guess that was our cue that they were. It was like the sunset sky. It was like cotton candy. That was beautiful. I saw Paul's dad at that exact moment, so I was just kind of staring at it. But
Well, just like the the backgrounds in general, like even in like An American Tail last episode and before that with Secret of Nim, like just
Oh yeah.
I think the thing that he does with his movies is just like set you in that it gives you this kind of feeling of place, because these backgrounds, not only are they painterly, but like they just kind of give you this sense of location that feels much more tangible than you think of like a lot of the CG animation stuff you're seeing today. Like you just never feel like you have a sense of place in a lot of those movies. In this one, you feel like you're in Nim, or you feel like you're in the section of New York in American Tail, or you feel like you're in this prehistoric land in Land Before Time.
Yeah, Briar Patch feels like you're gonna get poked.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that chase through there. I guess for me, story wise, and this kind of goes to what Zoe was saying with Sarah getting the short end of the stick, kind of. I feel like growing up, it really affected me, and I do think it's kind of half baked, but there was like this sort of like, and just from like a little boy's perspective, but I think it's still there, like that it's like boy and a girl, like Littlefoot and Sarah, like not getting along, which was very normal for me. Like I was the brother and I had a sister, and we just like didn't do, like there were just times where we just didn't get each other for whatever reason. And I think that it does seem like the argument, or like I don't know, like the way Littlefoot and Sarah go back and forth throughout the movie, as being like Littlefoot being the positive and Sarah being the negative, is kind of an interesting thing to explore. And Sarah being like a curmudgeon, like kind of kid, is like an interesting thing to explore. But I think they just like maybe just like paint her a little too mean. Like by the end of it just feels like
or just give her a little bit more of like what you got with Littlefoot at the beginning, like, she kept talking about going to be with her sisters, and like I barely remember her being with her sisters because she was playing with Littlefoot.
Right. They could have made it a little bit more 50-50, and that like it's like Sarah and like these are the two main characters, sort of like it almost happened, and it doesn't really, but it's still there. And I think that's like one of the things that I still really like about the story is the dynamic between the two characters.
I wonder how much what us as children, because it sounds like most of us are watching this as children along with the sequels, and I wonder how much as children, because this felt way more sparse than I remembered it being, and I wonder how much that is. All of these characters get way more screen time if you consider the entire like oeuvre of a dozen Land Before Time.
That's true.
Films, and maybe I don't know. I can't tell, because I definitely watched some of the sequels too. And I wonder if I kind of viewed them as a whole, and it was like, well, we didn't get that much of Sarah in this movie, but then in this other movie, I get more of Sarah, and so I kind of have pieced it all together as like, I know that character better than just any one movie does.
Sure, especially since it's like an hour long, and like you would probably just pop in the next one real quick.
Right.
Any final thoughts on Land Before Time before we wrap up?
I want to circle back around to the emotions of the movie, and just kind of to your point, Zach, about how much this differs from the children's animation we're seeing today. I feel like there's very little children's animation that like takes kids seriously on an emotional level, and is willing to offer kids emotions that are not just like happy, fun excitement. And like this movie goes in a lot of different emotional places and stays in those places for long periods of time. And I think that it is just like treating its audience with respect in a way that children's media like feels very pandery by comparison now.
Yeah,
I think and then, like, I think these like throughout like the history of children's animation, like movies like this have been the outlier with the American,
for sure.
It kind of like reminds me. Do y'all remember Brother Bear?
I do.
Yeah.
Like that movie, I don't think was very popular, but I rewatch that shit all the time.
It's also kind of melancholy movie with animals.
Yeah.
But I don't remember it being like a big Disney hit. Like it wasn't like
No.
It wasn't a part of like the Renaissance. It was more in that like
It was like the Atlantis era of Disney.
Yeah.
Love that one too.
It's definitely a movie. I guess, like, yeah, we've all been kind of hard on Land Before Time here, but I definitely agree with Andrew that it is like, and at the end of the day, like, I'm being hard on it because it is like very close, if not already there, to being something very like what I would want children's animation to be, like in a theatrical sense.
Well, even in the form it's in, it's a strong children's animation output because like
it's just easy to get greedy,
right?
Well, it also like challenges them to like have different emotional responses to things rather than just emotional stimulation. Like you think of like I've seen people talking about the Super Mario Brothers movie that just came out a few weeks ago, and that's just like stimulation, but it doesn't really have any like emotional complexity, which is somewhat offensive to the child to be like, you have no emotional complexity to like take this in, so
yeah, if anything, the like thought experiment for a kid is something that's easy to like kind of forget as an adult viewer, but like just the thought experiment of it, like me thinking about it as a kid was like, yeah, what if I was just suddenly like no parents and it was just me and my friends and we just have to like figure it out, like all of a sudden. It is kind of interesting, and yeah, it's like, whoa.
And I will say, as negative as I was earlier, I like this movie. I think it's really good, and I was as negative as I was because it's as good as it is.
Exactly.
Like, there's so many good things in this movie that are like really good that it kind of makes some of the other stuff stand out to me. But overall, I think it's really good. I think this is significantly better than An American Tail. So I don't know what I was thinking as a kid, but
How do you feel like it compares to Nim?
I think Nim is better, but Nim is kind of the same situation, not quite as dire, but like the same situation in which like there's some extremely strong elements that really anchor like the overall impression of Nim, and there's a few things that don't quite work in that movie. And I think that like even Don Bluth's best movies are all kind of compromised in some way. Like Nim was like kind of the budget was a problem, and then both American Tail and this movie, I think, suffer because of his choice of collaborators with Steven Spielberg in particular. And I haven't seen the 90s Bluth movies in so long, but I kind of remember them being all kind of hit and miss as well. So I don't know. Like, I kind of feel bad for Don Bluth because I don't feel like he's got the one movie where he was able to fully realize his vision.
It's interesting, just real quick in context. This comes out, Land Before Time comes out the same week as Oliver and Company for Disney.
Oh my gosh.
What a garbage movie.
In total opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, definitely makes all the gripes we have about this one like go out the door.
Yeah, no celebrity voice acting in this movie, thank God. No Billy Joel.
Yeah, just some silly kids.
Yeah, I'll take the baby voices over Billy Joel for sure.
I wish it would have been like 10 minutes longer. I think they could have gotten some things in that were missing if they went for that PG rating.
Do you think so? Zach, you said they're fully animated. Are those lost to time, like the cuts made, or are they kicking around? Maybe it's in the SCAD archives.
Yeah, maybe they're in the SCAD archives.
Or the box.
What is that?
That has all of Don Bluth's work.
Well, maybe we could get in.
Their special collections.
Maybe I'll ask them. Maybe they'll let me in.
Dude, you guys got to do like a heist and you rescue the 10 minutes cut, the Steven Spielberg casualties.
Oh, man. But then Steven shows up with a gun.
But it's just a walkie-talkie.
Oh, yeah.
No worries.
It looks like a gun.
Well, even if he shoots me, there'll be no blood, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, Land Before Time is on Netflix if you would like to watch it. And I think all of us highly recommend that. But that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary and on Twitter and Instagram at handle @Cinematary. If you'd like to support the show, head over to patreon.com/Cinematary. Thank you to our patrons, Cam, Chad Newsom, Candace Sisson, Ron Hayes, Teresa Marsathi, and Tyler Chandler. Thank you so much for your patronage. Next week, in our next episode, we're going to be continuing our Don Bluth series with 1997's Anastasia. So
Ooh.
getting a little Bolshevik,
Counter-revolutionary.
Historical.
get a little Russian historical. He's dabbled his feet in Russian historical in this series so far.
I've never seen that movie. Does he get into the insane woman who actually successfully paraded as Anastasia?
No, it's all about how. Oh shoot, what's his name? I almost said Raskolnikov, but that's from Crime and
Rasputin.
Rasputin. It's all about how Rasputin is really a wizard.
Yeah. He was the whole time.
Yeah.
And
Until then.
the Great Valley is just a mirage, and they're all gonna die, just like in Plague Dogs when they're going through the island. It's all just, I don't know.
No, the Great Valley exists here, so it will never be taken away.
Just like Rasputin's magic.
Exactly.
Right.
Until then, thank y'all for listening. We'll see ya.